Good morning again. My name is Mark Cormier, and on behalf of the organizing committee of the National Conference for Teachers of English, Costa Rica, I have the honor of introducing our next speaker. Professor Gilly Salmon is one of the world's leading thinkers, researchers, and practitioners in learning futures, focusing currently on Education 4.0 and new learning design and pedagogy for the post-COVID generation. She is CEO and principal consultant at Education Alchemists in London and adjunct professor at Swinburne University in Melbourne. Previously, she was pro-vice chancellor at the University of Western Australia. She publishes blogs and presents on innovation and transformation. Her books, E-Moderating and e-tivities, are considered seminal texts, and her Carpe Diem learning design methodology is deployed internationally. You can also see what she's up to by visiting her website, gillysalmon.com. So here to speak to us today with the presentation, Create the Future, Become an Amazing Learning Designer, please welcome Gilly Salmon.
Buenos días, conferencia NCTE Costa Rica. Hello, and lovely to speak to you this morning. Thank you all for getting up so early and taking a few steps into your computer room. I really appreciate the chance to talk to you. So I'm just, might need to share my screen again, I think, because I seem to be seeing lovely views of all of you rather than my slides. Is that working now?
Yes, it is.
Okay, that's super. So thank you so much for that introduction. My mother would believe it, I guess, but it's a real joy to be able to speak to all of you and very exciting. I'm in London. It's a rainy day today, surprise, but quite warm as it's summertime. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is really a little bit about going through a portal, making a jump. And you all know as teachers that you really do need to constantly make leaps forward into the future. And what's happened with COVID, which has been a huge disruption for everyone, everywhere in the world, has made the teaching of language and culture even more important as we all pull together in a global world, just as the video showed. So that was a wonderful start for me. So we're going to talk about jumping. So I'm going to give you some tools to make the jump into the future in a way that you would like to make it. So first of all, here's the agenda. What's in the little box is what I promised. An opportunity to explore evidence-based frameworks for learning online. The ones you might have heard of are the 5-stage model and e-tivities. So I'm going to concentrate on those. And I'm also going to invite you to become a designer of learning and also discover the new and very exciting roles of online teachers and how to apply them in your own practice. So we've got an hour and 20 minutes left to do that. And this is the way I'm going to try and do it through this agenda. But also I am going to give you links to a lot of resources. So I hope this will be a bit of a watershed time for you where you can think about different ways of doing things. And I hope you'll remember this little talk in the future when you're looking to do even more with your students. So here we go. First of all, can you please post one line, just one line in the chat box about your professional role? Some people have done that already, but if you haven't done, just what you do, who you are, just a few brief words, please. So that when we look through the questions, I can put them in context and have a little bit of understanding, because the first thing to remember when you become a designer is, of course, to understand your audience and know your brief before you you do anything with your, always know your audience and kind of where they're at that point. Okay, I'm going to move on. So we're going to try a little poll now. So you should see in a moment this poll come up in a way you can choose one, and then you'll start to see the results. So here's the little poll. Oh, that's the wrong one. Number 1. Can you see the little poll on your screen? And if you could just tick what you'd most like to get out of this workshop. Only one for now, I'm afraid. So I've given you 3 of what I think might be
like to get off these
the best options. If you've got some other burning need, please post it in the chat box. So at the moment, reliable frameworks for improving your teaching practice are winning. Transition tactics and strategies, probably understanding online learning for your students, the next popular. I'll give it a few more minutes. Definitely reliable frameworks. So, oh, that's good, because that's what I was going to spend most of my time on. So that's pretty good. Anyone else want to fill in the poll now? We've got 248 people. Those of you who are just coming in, can you just tick one box from poll 1, which should be on your screen at the moment? Just another couple of minutes on this. Oh, definitely. So it's very clear. Reliable frameworks for improving your teaching practice, understanding online learning for your students, and some transition tactics. So I'm going to have a go at all of those, but I'll keep my emphasis on the first one, because 47% of you have decided that's the one that you most want. Thank you for that. I'm going to stop sharing those results now. So there's another one now for you, another little poll coming up. Now you're getting the idea of this. And this is poll 2. Now, what's the great joy of a big conference like this is for you to meet new friends, new colleagues, and be able to stay in touch with each other. People that you'd never get the opportunity to meet, and possibly if we were at a physical conference, you wouldn't either. So what you can contribute, maybe, what you've got to offer. This one seems to be offering resources or ideas to others. I think everyone seems to be looking a little bit over the horizon and moving from the emergency online teaching that we've all been doing. It's great that you're willing to offer support to others and ideas to others. Really, really brilliant. So please keep posting in the chat box a URL or an idea or a link, because this whole session is being recorded and you will eventually get the record of that. So it's easy. And it is easy to cut and paste if you see something you really want to take it out of the chat box. So you might want to open a little notes file for yourself as we go through. Anyone else want to put a contribution in? So that's definitely brilliant. Support to others and resource and ideas to others. That's the very best of conferencing, really. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to, there's a few more coming in. And that was 55% of people have got ideas and resources for others. So we definitely want to tap into that. Okay, I'm going to end that polling now. Okay, so first of all, some of you will feel that you are in transition, that the emergency has kind of sparked off a transition from one world to another, from what you got used to as normal to what people are calling the new normal. And one of the things you need to do in order to go through that portal is to understand a bit more about what we call threshold concepts. Now, threshold concepts are not necessarily outcomes, but they're experiences that help you move from what was to what will be. So I've put a few ideas up here about what the threshold concepts might be to move from largely classroom-based learning, classroom-based teaching, place-based learning, to online and blended learning. And typically in the universities that I work with, it's a moving from what we call the lone wolf, where you're fully responsible for everything. You really base what you decide you're going to do on teaching hours and the availability of the timetable and the room and you as the teacher. And that's the way we've got used to being it like this. However, we're now moving very much towards much more collaborative team design and the sharing of resources and sharing of models that we know to be sound and work and rigorous. And also that means you can design your learning once and then deliver it many times. So it's a move towards becoming a designer, and that means you need a design brief, and then you need to know threshold concepts and outcomes, and then you know what you're designing for. And it means that as you move online, that you have to have a stronger sense of pedagogy. By that we mean scaffolding, structure, pacing, but also not to lose the flexibility for students that might come with all the resources being available online. And there's also the sense that you want everyone to have an equivalent experience, not necessarily the same experience, but at least as good as each other, even if you're using different modes of learning. And you also need to align the modes of learning so they all move through together. And I'm going to say a bit more about those key threshold concepts now. So is everyone still with me? Everyone okay? Yeah? Yep, thank you for those yeses. Okay. So I'm going to talk about two key ways of becoming a designer. One is to design your learning, and the second part of it is then the delivery of the learning to your students. Now, normally we think about a kind of design and delivery all muddled up in a cycle. You almost certainly think about designing activities in advance, but I think the way to become an amazing learning designer is to design the whole experience in a holistic way and then work out what skills you need to deliver it. And to do that, I'm going to share with you some very well researched and rehearsed concepts that will enable you to start a fair way down the line and to make it work. It's just up to you then to make them your own for your students and your context. So we're going to start with design, and I'm going to talk about two key aspects of designing learning. The first is creating a brief. In other words, a bit of a blueprint for yourself. So you really articulate exactly what you're going to do. And secondly, how to create a storyboard that actually addresses the alignment that what you'll need to do to make the design work. So it's a bit of prior thinking and then a bit of application. Now, if you remember nothing else that I tell you and we talk about during this next hour and a half, please remember this. Start with the end in mind. Don't start at the beginning. If you start with the end in mind, what you want to achieve, and then work back from the amount of time you have, rather than saying, I want to do a bit of this and a bit of that, and they should do this and they should know that. Start with working out the learning outcomes and the key threshold concepts, and then you'll find you are starting to create yourself a really good design brief. And then you need to use a structured design methodology. And I'm going to show you a couple that I use, and they're all on my website in considerable detail. There's even a handbook for the modules design. So if you wanted to, you could work through it yourself or with others in your school. The first one is called Carpe Diem for programs. So this is where we design a whole degree or a whole qualification. And this is a way of one way of jumping through the portal. And you can see I've put the reference to the website up there. So it's my website and then hyphen Carpe Diem. And we call it Carpe Diem because if you get the right people together and you do the right things, you can do it in one day. You can do it in one day. And you can see some of the illustrations there of what you can do. So it helps if you can visualize things rather than just write things down. And what you see on the right-hand side of the screen is the program storyboard portals that the students are going to move through. This is one we did over a whole degree, so it's 3 years, that one. And the picture in the middle is the visualization of the student in his or her workplace in 10 years' time, because you need to look ahead and think of the student in his or her context. And that video we saw at the beginning showed the absolute key importance about teaching English. You're really making a big difference to your students in the world in all sorts of ways. And here's an example of one that I've done fairly recently. The photograph at the top was at the University of Liverpool. You've probably heard of Liverpool because of the Beatles and their two great football teams. But this was at the University of Liverpool. It's a fairly wet place because it's on the west coast of England near the Irish Sea, and it was a wet and windy morning at 9 o'clock when we first got together to try and draw the graduate of the future for their MBA. And then you can see at the bottom what the outcome was. They stopped thinking about their MBA students as students and started through the pedagogical journey to think about them as resolvers of problems. So this was the key threshold that they went through. And then they also began to build a river with both the barriers and the opportunities that will go onto their storyboard. So that's one key way of creating the journey. Okay, so just a little bit more about how to scaffold knowledge through threshold concepts. I've put a whole series of references at the end of my talk about this because it may be new to some of you, but it is an important idea that you open up these portals, these gateways for your students. And one way of thinking about it is to thinking back about your own learning, either about learning English or learning anything else. Was there a moment when suddenly something clicked and you said, aha, I see things differently now? It was often something that you found very difficult before, and either a teacher, something you read, something you did actually helped you to see it. So a little bit more about threshold concepts, because they are fundamental understandings that sit at a body of knowledge. And you need to get learners to get them, and to be warned, they're actually quite troublesome to teach. So they're not the obvious thing to teach, but they do mean that all your students will move on faster. So I phoned up a teacher of English that I know. He's actually Spanish, lives in Spain. I phoned him up and asked him, because I couldn't consult all of you, what threshold concepts might be relevant to you of teachers of English. And you will all have your own, but these are the ones that he gave me. I don't know whether they're the ones for you, but they were very interesting to me. They weren't kind of obvious things about grammar or vocabulary or sentence structure or declining verbs, but they were really quite different things. Now I'm going to put the third poll up. Can you have a look at these and see whether you think one of these could be a threshold concept in your own teaching? See what you think. Here we go. So just choose one. And you can see how they're coming in. A lot of people like the relationship between grammar and meaning, almost as many like the effect of context. Different ways of structuring texts can produce different effects. I don't even understand that, not being an English teacher myself, but I'm sure you do. And the way language helps to reveal a variety of meanings, I think I have a little of insight of what that might mean. That's brilliant. The link between understanding each other through language. Keep going, those of you who haven't voted, and keep your eye on what the percentages are. We're definitely getting, we're getting the most. Language can be analysed to reveal a variety of meanings at the moment, but they're quite well spread, aren't they, really? I mean, I no doubt more than one is important, but if you have a look at this and in future, from now onwards, when you start with the end in mind, have one or two of these threshold concepts. Eugenia, if you don't relate to any of them, can you pop in the poll what might be meaningful for you? Happy to take any more that there are for everyone to consider. Okay, I think the last one related the most, but there is a spread through all of them, with the relationship between grammar and medium being second, then the effect of context, and need to use evidence for ideas. So if anyone wants to pop any more that are their ideas of threshold concepts, please put them in the chat and we can capture them. I like your answer, Beatrix, in the chat. Yeah, okay, I'm ending that one. Thanks very much, everyone, for taking part. Okay, so I hopefully I've just given you a little insight of what I mean for threshold concepts for your teaching, which is not really quite the same as an outcome that your student will be able to do this and that. You probably need them as well. But I'm just saying to you, if you can get to grips on some of these things, then you're doing portal work, really. You're doing work on portals. Okay, is everyone all right on that? If I move on to another topic, yeah? Now, this difficult concept of equivalence. Now, most of you will be used to classroom teaching or face-to-face teaching or face-to-face in context. And some of you, of course, will have used online resources, and a few of you might have been teaching online. The idea of creating equivalence is not to try and take what you know about classroom teaching into the online experience, but instead to create an experience that creates the same output as classroom teaching, but uses the opportunities of being online and through technology enhancement in different kinds of ways. So you do not have to change your basic learning outcomes and the things that you think are important, but you may need to change the way that you design and deliver. So when you're working as a designer of learning, you need to work out, not just say, okay, well, we need 6 lectures. They need to do this, that, and the other. You need to move to what the students will acquire through the experience. And you may find that it's going to be quite different from what they do in class. Now, my experience has been that if you can do it through a design approach, it's as good as an experience, and sometimes even better, to be online or using Blend. And I've put a recent blog I've written on there, which has a link to a whole range of studies demonstrating that equivalence does result in as good, if not better, outcomes. They cover all disciplines, but some of them are covering teaching English. So I do invite you to link into that blog and have a look for yourself with what interests you. And now I'm going to move on to talking about how you design in detail of an actual module or unit of study. I don't know what you normally mean, but I mean where it's a complete course that's probably part of something bigger, a set of subject activities that results in some assessment. Students may even need prerequisites and level of learning in order to go in. And all of those of you who are English teachers will all have done that for yourself, and you're used to doing that for students. What is most important, again, is start with the end in mind. Not where they start, but where they end is what really is important. Now, this is using another version of Carpe Diem, which is called Carpe Diem for Modules. Again, I've put the website up there. There's lots of help for you on there if you'd like to do it. If anyone wants to translate it into Spanish and send me the handbook, I'd be delighted to put it up there, or any other language, come to that. And there's 6 stages to it, and they're quite simply normally done in a long, intensive day, but we're now doing it in other ways, using 8 to 10 hours in total. Either 2 half days or possibly 2 days, 2 hours every morning. But you can't do this properly in less than about 8 hours of collaborative work. And you can see people working together in the illustrations. So this is another way of jumping through the portal to this new normal, the new world, and to become an amazing learning designer. So you start off with number 1, of building a blueprint. The term blueprint is generally used for buildings. Architects use it. It comes from the architectural origin. And it's the idea that you do a complete plan for everything that you can later build and experience. So the techniques are creative techniques to help you build that blueprint. The second part of it is the storyboard, where you lay out all the activities, the timings, both calendar time and student study time. If you see the illustration of the storyboard in the bottom right of the screen, you'll see there's some little dots. They're little plastic buttons, tiddlywinks we call them in English. Each one of those represents 1 student study hour. It's not the teacher's study time or teaching time, because it's the whole course. So this would have been a university module, which would have had, say, 120 study hours. And by putting the Carpe Horum coins on there, seize the hour coins on there, you can work out that you have used 120 hours. Of course, it has to be an estimate at that point, although when you've run the course and you've delivered it, you can get a bit more accurate about that. And it's evenly spread and reasonable, the amount of time they spend on learning, the amount of time they spend on assessing, and all the different types of activities are in there. And that's what makes it a pedagogical process. That's what makes it a journey. And then in the workshop, we also build a little prototype in the online environment. I'm going to show you more about that in a minute. That's called e-tivities. Then we do a reality check. Is this going to work for real? Always try your online learning out on someone else, either your colleagues, your students, whoever you've got around you, your kids. Bring them in, get them to. We're doing virtual storyboards. You can do them in PowerPoint. You can do them in Padlet. You can do them in Trello. You can share in Jamboard in Google. You may well need to find, if you're working together, a way to do that. But I'm sorry, I haven't got an illustration on that at the moment, but we're working through that right now. And then you do a review and adjust. When you do that, you'll almost certainly constantly refer back to your original blueprint, just as an architect will. When the builders come in to do the building, you actually have to see what things look like, whether it is functional. So you've got to be prepared to iterate. And that's the great part of being a designer. You always can be creative and then bring it back to the practical, and then creative and bring it back to the practical. And finally, plan your next steps, because you're going from the design to the build. The quickest time we've ever done this is to have done the storyboard, the carpe diem for modules with the storyboard on the Friday, and then it's been delivered to students on the Monday. But usually you'll need to then build it into your virtual learning environment or whatever other technology you want to use. So allow yourself probably a few weeks if you can. Certainly should be in time for the next academic year, hopefully. As I say, more about that on the website. I hope you get the basic idea. Loriana, Jamboard works on Teams. You just share screen the same as I'm doing for my PowerPoint. So that does work quite well. I quite like it because it's almost like using little Post-its. Somebody else loves Padlet. It's good. They all work for doing storyboards. Okay, just a little bit more about jumping through the portal and becoming a fantastic learning designer. I'm going to talk to you about another framework that's been very well rehearsed. In fact, I'm going to talk to you about two of them. I'm going to talk about e-tivities, play on words, online activities, and also about the 5-stage model. Both of these were originally my work, but they've been crowdsourced throughout the world, throughout different disciplines and levels of education. So you can be confident that if you try these and you follow the rubrics for them, that you'll be well on the way to having a way of implementing your design brief. So I'm going to start first of all with the 5-stage model. Now this is a grounded model, so it's not a framework I invented and then said everybody do it this way. It's actually an observation of a very large number of students and what they did given the opportunities in the very early days of working online. Now, I was working with the UK Open University, which is the largest distance university in the world. And I was working in the business school, and I had 4,000 students online throughout Europe. And at the time, I had over 1,000 taking part in the research. And I gave them the chance to do things and then did a massive grounded model based on their behavior. So this may be similar to what you do anyway. It should feel intuitively right, but it's now been turned into a model that other people can follow, both for design and delivery. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. As you can see, there's 5 stages. The first one is that if you've got students online, they must have access and they must be motivated to come back, not just once, not just twice, not just 3 times, but constantly, frequently, and preferably for relatively short times, but often. Now, you know that you can't just motivate someone else to do that. In fact, it's back to the design again. You need to create an environment where they'll want to come back and they're desirous to come back, and make links between each episode that they come online. And that's how you create motivation. And you need to make sure they've got access in the way, all the ways that access might mean. I agree with you, Gabriella. You get very good motivation in virtual classes. That's been my experience, and sometimes even better. And I think one of the reasons for this is that once people have got access, they feel quite relaxed with others who are there. None of the usual stereotypes and so on get in the way. And so hopefully you'll find that. Gabriella, Jamboard's free as far as I know. It's part of the Google Suite. Next one, online socialization. Essentially, what you're doing in the online world is treating it as another place to be. So you wouldn't just jump in and as people came through the door, giving them the hardest things to do, you'd at least do some sort of ice breaking, something. You found out who was there, how they can relate to each other. And what we found is that stage 2, which should come next, you should give them easy things to do, certainly using your subject, which is obviously learning English, but easy things to do to relate to each other. What's your name? And all the rest of the things that you already know about. You'll have masses of those kinds of activities. And you will find people will relate to each other if it's something they've got to contribute rather than something they have to answer. So you'll find on the e-tivities page I showed you before, there's lots of examples of how you can do that. Stage 3 is information exchange. So at this point, I'm guessing that you're going to get people to give information that they have or that they can easily find. And at that point, you can expect a cooperative framework to work, which means that people will still be in pursuit of their individual goals, but they will be willing to help each other. And that's what you should promote at that point. And you will then be able to go on to stage 4, which is a much more collaborative approach, where you can have joint goals or jointly agreed goals, and you can give them much more difficult and demanding things to do and encourage them to use the group and the peer working to help each other. And finally, at stage 5, development, this is where you can get the metacognition coming in. They can look back over what they've done, be reflective, reflect on how they've learned. And if you can even get a few activities going on about how they're learning, not only what they're learning, then you're going to give them a true educational experience that will last them forever and be built upon and will help the next time they learn. So that's a very short summary of the 5-stage model. But as a designer, if you can take account of each of those stages in that order and try and have at least one activity at each stage during your design, I promise you the students will be more engaged, your retention will be better, and you'll usually be much happier about their achievement. Okay, hope you're still all with me. Yeah. Little bit more about alignment and what that means, and you do need to do that as you take them through the 5-stage model. It's a way, what we mean by is a way of the learner constructing his or her own learning through relevant learning activities. So you create the learning environment to support the activities rather than you doing all the work. So sure, you've got to be the designer, you've got to create the environment and the activities for them to do, but after that time, you do much less so that they get on with the work. And what alignment then means is the curriculum, the intended outcomes, the delivery, and most importantly, the assessment tasks are all aligned with each other. That's why the storyboard is important. You need to lay it out so that you can actually see a pathway through and how things connect together. Remember the cogs in the wheels. And as far as possible, make your assessment real world and aligned with your teaching. I know teachers of language and teachers of English are usually really good at making real world assessment because that's the way you think. I know you do. But you want them to be able to apply it. Just because I think this is so important, I have put a little bit more of a checklist up. So when you're designing, you can use this checklist. Start with your outcomes brief as always, and then start to think about the student in his or her work environment and try and think about what would be authentic. And you can see I've said if you just want one line on this, assess how well the student can think or act like a practitioner or a professional in the field. So when they're using their language or using their learning, how can you assess for that rather than assess for what you thought you were teaching them? And so project-based learning, problem-based learning, reflections collected over time generally work best and allow for the possibility of different judgments, because if you design this sort of learning, they really could surprise you. And Raquel, I think they will surprise you, really. I think they will. So that's a bit about how assessment goes in with your design brief. So I want you to think about whether you could actually try authentic assessment. And Mark, I think we'll have a grow at just for 5 minutes, whether people can go into their breakout rooms and have a bit of a discussion about how they can align assessment with their design brief. Are you ready to try that?
Absolutely. So I think
So
that's a great
if we
idea.
give them, say, 8 minutes to discuss, and then if anyone wants to say anything either in the chat or live when they come back.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so has everyone got that? Yeah.
Okay, so can I
We're
try
gonna,
launching them?
yeah, please do. Hopefully you can hear me and we're all back again now.
Yes.
Okay. Right, it's just something else I wanted to share with you about scaffolding. And that there's another framework called e-tivities. So again, I've put references up here for you. The Key to Active Online Learning, it's called. But also, if you look on the website there, it's gillysalmon.com/e-tivities. There's a considerable amount there of frameworks that you can use. And what these are is a little piece of work that you can put together using this framework for your teaching. And there's a couple of characters. This was very well researched over a 3-year project. So each line of the framework has a characteristic to it and has been well researched. So first of all, a small piece of spark or information, a stimulus or a challenge, not a great big long video, not read these pages, not do all these exercises. Try and do it something small that promotes the dialogue or activities. And then you've got an online activity where an individual makes a contribution. You then encourage other people to respond to the individual contributions. And this is how you gradually build up a cooperative and collaborative activity. And the breakout group I was in, we were talking about the authenticness of what students are actually doing, where sometimes it's the parents getting involved or some other teacher teaching in a quite different way. If you do it this way, where they all make a contribution and then respond to each other, you are getting a little bit of that authentic students' work coming in there. And at the end of it, you then do a summary or critique from yourself. The online teacher I call the e-moderator. And most importantly, all the instructions to take part are on one page in your virtual learning environment or learning management system. So this does work. It helps students to work together. And ideally, you can have one at each stage of the 5-stage model, so that you know you are pulling them through. So I'll show you a little example of this now. Mark, can you see slide 27? Okay.
Yes.
It's presenting a bit differently to me. So this is an example down the left-hand side of what you'll see on the website to help you to do that. You have a title, always have a purpose, always a brief summary of the overall task, then the spark. In this case, the example I'm giving, it was somebody that had written to me in a course that I was running. An individual contribution, the dialogue or the activity begins, your intervention, and always tell them the schedule and the time. And that's both calendar time. It's Monday now. I'm going to finish this activity on Friday. And this should take you a total of 2 hours between now and then. And then what they're going to do next if you've got them online. So it's really building in quite detailed structure to the way you implement your work. There's also on here one of the YouTube videos that I put up, which enables you to work through doing this quite quickly. I think it lasts about 8 minutes. And you'll be able to design your own activity from that. And I treat it like an invitation to take part rather than a delivery of a piece of teaching. So that's my example of e-tivities. And as you can see, it's another way of structuring and pacing what you do with flexibility. And it works best in asynchronous working. I know for younger kids, it may not work so well doing it asynchronously, but with the older ones and adults, it can be scheduled so that they take part in a small way over several days. These activities are very cheap and easy to try, and you'll soon get skilled at doing them because you get immediate feedback from them. So just to remind you that all of this is within an overall framework, which I call Carpe Diem. And so I've tried to give you some tools that you can do very quickly and try out for yourself. That's what the actual model looks like if you're doing a storyboard. So you get your 5-stage model across the top, stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the number of weeks in your, I think it's called, I've been tipped off that a module is a unit for you. Your topics across the top, any face-to-face components, traditionally we have those in green, and any activities we have in blue, and then your assessment. And you should ultimately be able to draw a line between them as if you were a student going through the roadway or the river or the pathway. Hope that makes some sense. You'll see lots more examples on the website. And here we have some happy people who have done their storyboard. You remember that picture I showed you at Liverpool University earlier on in my talk? And this is their storyboard. And note, they've really worked out for each week how many hours the students will be spending on it. And they were so happy when they did it. And as you can see, they did it collaboratively. I'm just wondering if we can use the chat. If anyone's got any views about storyboards to put it in there, do you think you could try this? What do you like about them? What you don't like about them? Put some ideas in there. I just wanted to get a few views from you on that. Anyone want to put anything in there? Megan says she doesn't understand them. Yeah, yeah, so have a work through. There's also on my website, Megan, some video about people gradually working through them. So I get that I've talked about it very quickly. But if you watch a video on it where you can see it gradually building up, I think that may help you. And then I think it's a lot easier for you to tell your learners, and you can be quite creative. I just think if you have a go, you'll just be a little bit happier at the end. Marta, the PowerPoint, everything's been recorded. So it'll be sent out to, I think, Mark in a couple of days when they've had chance to organize everything. Certainly after the conference is over, I would think.
And then I'll say a little bit more about that, guys, at the end of this presentation. I'll give you all the instructions so you know what's coming.
Thanks, Mark. Okay. Yeah, I agree. It's covering all the different aspects of learning. Gabrielle, I hope you'll have a little go at doing them. Thank you. Okay, that's good. So I think I might have inspired a few of you to have a bit of a go. So that's absolutely great. Thank you for that. So you're now going to be amazing designers. You're going to design your learning, and you can do this in advance of people coming in. And just to say, there's a little bit else that you need to do to make this all work. And that's what I call the delivery part of it. Now you can use the 5-stage model again, and I'll explain why to you. On the access and motivation part of it, you're really like a host at a party. You're welcoming people in, you're acknowledging their presence, you're encouraging them to say, this is what you'll get if you stay the course. Always look ahead and sell benefits. You can do that quite blatantly of taking part. Then at the online socialization, you can set them activities to do. Don't leave it to chance. You can do little e-tivities that are about everyone contributing something of their own. You know, I mean, a very popular one is your favorite food or the view from your window, those sorts of things. So they help them to use English, to get to know each other. And you will be much happier about how they work together later if you can do that. But your role is not really as teacher at that point. It's more as facilitator. The information exchange, again, your role is as a designer to encourage them to give information to each other and work together. And then the knowledge construction, you can do more difficult things. You can divide them into groups, give them goals that they try and solve themselves. And then, as I said, at that point, your role is actually to do less, but to do it more carefully and try and get much more peer working going. And make sure you finish off by the role of promoting the cognitive learning and the reflection, where you're not really a teacher or trying to convey information. You're actually encouraging them to be self-reflective, and try and leave a little bit time at the end to go back over what they've learned and ask them questions about how they did it and what they thought about it. And this is how you really promote true engaged learning. So you can see your roles are very different going all the way through. And there's probably two key skills that I would suggest that you need that are different from the more conventional teaching. And one is your ability to summarize a whole body of work that the students have contributed online. And you can do that fairly easily. You don't need to spend a lot of time on that, but it's always a good idea and motivating if people have made good points to highlight them. It's also your chance to do a bit of teaching, to put things right. If you're not happy, they've gone off in the wrong direction or something's incorrect. And also the weaving is to pull together threads of what people have been contributing online and then representing them. So like weaving a thread, and sometimes they will do things that you haven't expected and surprise you. And it's really good to acknowledge that. And give them good feedback, give them good feedback on this, because you're not losing your role as a teacher at all. But you are actually basing it on work they've done rather than you being upfront delivering the information. You're kind of pointing the finger at certain things and pulling it together. So I'm going to stop so we can answer some of these questions that are coming in. I'm going to start, if you want any other questions, I'm going to start with some of the ones that we had on the chat. Just some comments. Rod has been collecting up some ideas for us from the chat. The storyboard doesn't have to be a physical storyboard. You can if and when we're again co-located, and that will happen eventually, but you can do it just as well online using some of the tools that we've described. And I probably should have given you some examples of those, but you can do it working together. It probably takes you a little bit longer if you're not together, but you can definitely, as long as you've got a shared whiteboard or some sort of shared document, even Google Docs will work. But Jamboard in Google, which is free, there's free versions of Trello, Padlet, and so on that you can use. So it isn't just physical, although that's where it began. That's how we first did it. How to make virtual teaching real, Beatrix. Well, I think I've tried to talk about authentic outcomes and threshold concepts. I don't think you need to do any more than make sure that you're constantly referring back to outcomes, which is going to be clearly in the real world. So just make it clear that what you're teaching them is not for use just online, but is in use for in context. And as long as you're clear about that, that's what makes you a fantastic learning designer. Thanks for the compliment, Christian, about my accent. It's London accent. I was born in East London, and so it's not quite BBC in English, but it's a London accent. Many of you will have been taught with people with American accent, I guess. So thanks for that. Have I covered them all, Rod, that you've put to me?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Carla wanted to know, and I think she posted the question twice.
Right.
Could you give some clarity about what is meant by starting with the end in mind, please?
Yes, of course. Of course. Okay, Carla, and I think a couple of other people have asked about that. What I mean by that is that you really need to think about what the impact, if you understand that word, what the impact of your teaching will be for the student after the whole course is over. And it's this idea, if you know what you're aiming for over the hill for each individual student or group, and that's quite different from starting at the beginning and think, well, they've got to learn this and this and this, and I've got to make them do this and this and this. So I hope that explains it a bit more. And I think also the portal idea, that you're flying through a portal to something new on the other side, have that image in mind. also, so I think it helps to take you out of yourself a bit and into the student's mind. How are they going to use this? Think about if you met that student in 5 years' time, you know, and they were using their English, what would you wish for them? You know, what would you wish for them to be doing? I don't know whether that helps at all. A bit more about the spark to start on the activities. What I try and do there is things to be authentic. The one I showed you, I'll just see if I can find it again. The top there in the sort of pinky red writing. This was a course that I was running on online teaching, and it was entirely based on 30 activities, and they worked through the 5-stage model. So this was week 2, and it was activity 3 in week 2. And this guy called Andy, he sent me really what was quite a rude message that said, I'm fed up with the people in this forum who spend their time looking in on those who are doing all the real work. Now, this is very common, especially with teenagers and adults, where they give them group work to do. They think everybody else is cheating them. So I took this message that I had, which was authentic, it was real, and I put it in my course for teachers. And then I asked them to talk about how they would respond to that and what the range of options were. But what Andy, this rather rude guy, Andy doesn't know that over the years, around 3,000 students have responded to him in my course. Because I've had about 3,000 students go through this. So, or you can use a little YouTube video, you can use a song or a poem or whatever you wish, but it's a little something rather than a big something. But you need to choose carefully that something will engage their interest and then get them to start the ball rolling from that. Does that help at all on that? Yeah. I'm just going to have a quick look through the chat myself if anyone else can highlight to me anything I've missed.
There was, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
There was quite a bit of expression of concern possibly about online students or virtual students and the tensions of work-life balance.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know whether you got to answer that one or not.
I'm not sure I have. No, we did discuss it in our breakout group, but I think that if you can do a reasonably good design and you can use activities, you will be able to be very clear to students how much time you're expecting them to spend on each activity. The first time you do it, you'll probably have to estimate it, and then the next time get them to tell you how they actually spent time on it. You will actually find that it is motivating and it will provide commitment to them. You also need to spread it out over calendar time. So that, for example, if you give something to me today and I need to do it by Monday, and I know it's going to take me 2 hours, I can do it this evening, I can do it tomorrow, I can collect up everything I've got to do and do it on Sunday, and so on. And be clear that you're not coming in to comment on that because you've designed it in advance. Whereas you will be there at the time you promise, which might be 10 o'clock Monday morning, and they'll get feedback from you. So I suppose in with the design brief, you're also becoming a project manager as well, and trying to make it absolutely clear what your expectation is and how much time they should spend on it. I agree it's one of the more difficult things, but that helps everyone with their work-life balance and with yours as well, you know, to know what's expected of you and when. So that's the way I deal with it. Of course, you know, if you've got a lot of other work to do. It can be challenging, but you should get a better response from students. Just one little tip though, the reason students come online, the main reason students come online, it's 79% from our research, is to see whether something that the student has posted has been commented on either by the teacher or by another student or by a peer. So that's why e-tivities are so motivating, that you get them to post something and then you get others to respond to them, and they know at the end that the teacher's going to come in and see that work. It's always important to get a kind of a product that they present to you, rather than you're commenting on all the work as it goes on. And you do that naturally in class, but you need to think about designing for that. The other big tip is always for each activity that you design to tell them why it's important. I mean, this was a simple one that I've put up here, to write encouraging replies. However, it could be anything much more in depth. And if it relates to an assessment or an assignment they're going to do, tell them. You know, it's absolutely fine to tell them that it relates to one of your outcomes. So we're nearly out of time. I've probably got one last question. I'm just going to show you my going out slides before we have to cut off. This one's important. It's got my website on, my personal website with all my research and practice on, and the company website that I work with here, which will tell you more about the courses and so on that we ran, but also on my Gilly Salmon website. So that's good. You can have a look at those. They're all open. These are 2 YouTube videos, the Creating e-tivities one and the 5-stage model. So you can, they're both open and on YouTube, so you can have a look at those. And then the last ones are threshold concepts, so you can, there's quite a practical and valuable article there. All the references, well, not all of them, but some of them about how people have used them around the world, if you like, that kind of thing. And authentic assessment. I know some of you are interested in that. So, you know, perhaps read up on 1 or 2 of those before you try to do it. So that's completely it from me. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. It's been a great pleasure to be able to talk to you all. And thanks so much for Mark, Rod and Jonathan for keeping us all going. I didn't have too many technical problems, and it looks like most people are still here. So I think we did really well.
I would say it's a success, yes. Well,
thank you so much.
Thank you. And on behalf of the organizing committee for the NCTE, we really want to thank you, Professor Salmon, for your presentation today, for your willingness to share your time and all of these resources and contribute to the success of our first ever online conference. So we would like the people with their cameras on to please give a virtual applause so you can check that out. You can see everybody.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for that.
Thank you very much. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. You're going to have to be very steadfast and keep going on, you. Oh, thank you so much, everyone. It's lovely to talk to you.